My sister harshly judged my parenting, but completely lost it when I called out her hypocrisy. I, 43 female, have been dealing with family drama for as long as I can remember, but this latest situation with my sister, 38 female, takes the cake. I honestly want to know if I was out of line for calling her a hypocrite after she harshly judged my parenting. For some background, I have 2 kids, a 16-year-old son and a 12-year-old daughter. My sister, on the other hand, has 1 child, a 5-year-old daughter. We have always had very different parenting styles. I try to raise my kids with a balance of structure and independence. They have chores, but I also give them space to make mistakes and learn from them. I believe that allowing them to experience small failures now will prepare them for the real world, where I won't always be there to guide them. They know they can come to me for help and advice, but I make sure they have the tools to handle life's challenges on their own. I don't hover over their every move, and while I set clear expectations, I also allow them room to grow and express themselves. My sister, however, is the type of mom who hovers over her child like a helicopter, micromanaging every aspect of her daughter's life. She doesn't allow her daughter to make even the smallest decision on her own, from what she eats to what clothes she wears to how she spends her free time. Everything is meticulously planned and monitored, leaving no room for independence. She constantly second-guesses her child's choices, stepping in before she even has the chance to figure things out on her own. It's as if she believes that by controlling every aspect of her daughter's environment, she can prevent any mistake from ever happening. She calls it protecting her, but to me, it seems more like she's setting her up to struggle later in life when she inevitably has to make her own decisions without her mother there to intervene. Now, my sister and I have always had our differences, but things came to a head last weekend during a family gathering at my house. I was hosting as usual, cooking, cleaning, and making sure everyone was comfortable while my husband's family, and a few extended relatives mingled. It was exhausting, but I wanted everyone to have a good time, so I pushed through, making sure food was served and that everyone had what they needed. My sister showed up late, as she often does, and barely acknowledged the effort I had put into the evening before she started nitpicking things about my kids. She made comments about how my son wasn't engaged enough in the conversation with adults, despite the fact that he had been chatting with my husband's uncle about school and sports just minutes before. She also criticized my daughter for talking back when I asked her to set the table, though in reality, my daughter had only expressed a preference for which side of the table she wanted to arrange first. I brushed it off at first, choosing to focus on keeping the evening running smoothly rather than getting into an argument. But then, she really crossed the line. She told me that my parenting was too lax and that my kids were going to grow up to be entitled because I didn't correct them enough. The implication that I was failing as a mother hit a nerve. My son is a straight-A student who volunteers at a local shelter in his free time, always willing to help others without expecting anything in return. My daughter, while independent and outspoken, is also incredibly kind, always the first to offer to help with younger cousins or take care of small tasks around the house. I have always been proud of how they are turning out, and hearing my sister criticize them as if they were unruly brats made my blood boil. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check, but I couldn't just let it slide anymore. The fact that my sister, who has to navigate a full-blown meltdown whenever her daughter doesn't get her way, was accusing me of not setting boundaries was too much to bear. The hypocrisy of it all was glaringly obvious, yet she spoke with such confidence, as if she truly believed she had all the answers. That was when I knew I had reached my limit. At this point, I was already irritated, but I let it slide. Then, during dinner, my niece had a meltdown because she didn't want to eat the food my sister had packed for her. Yes, my sister brings her own kids' meals to events because she refuses to let her eat anything that isn't organic and whole foods only. The meltdown started as whining, but quickly escalated into full-blown screaming, with tears streaming down her face as she kicked her feet under the table. She refused to sit still, throwing her napkin on the floor and pushing her plate away as my sister scrambled to calm her down. The meltdown lasted a good 20 minutes, with screaming, crying, and her throwing things, all while my sister coddled her and tried to gently talk her down. She whispered reassurances, stroked her hair, and tried to reason with her in hushed tones, but nothing worked. The rest of us sat there awkwardly, attempting to continue our meal as if we weren't in the middle of a chaotic scene. My meal shot me a look, clearly uncomfortable, and my husband sighed quietly as we all tried to ignore the outburst. My kids, who had been patiently sitting and eating, exchanged glances but said nothing. What made it worse was that this wasn't the first time this had happened. At nearly every family gathering, my niece had some sort of episode, whether it was refusing to share toys, throwing tantrums when things didn't go her way, or needing to be the center of attention at all times. My sister would always insist that she was validating her feelings while the rest of us had to suffer through the chaos. It had gotten to the point where family members would brace themselves whenever my sister arrived, knowing there was a high chance of a scene unfolding. No one wanted to say anything, though, because my sister was overly defensive about her parenting style, acting as if any suggestion that she take a firmer stance was an attack on her as a mother. As I sat there watching this all unfold yet again, I felt my frustration boil over. The fact that this was the same person who had just moments ago criticized my children for being entitled and undisciplined was beyond ironic. I knew I had to say something. I set my fork down and looked directly at my sister. "You know," I said, keeping my voice even, "it's really interesting you feel the need to critique my parenting when your own child is the only one throwing a tantrum at the table." She immediately bristled. "Excuse me, she's 5. She's still learning how to regulate her emotions. You can't compare a young child to teenagers." I let out a short laugh, though there was no humor in it. "You're right, she is 5. And yet, I don't remember my kids ever screaming through an entire meal at that age because they didn't get exactly what they wanted. But go ahead, keep telling me how I'm the one raising entitled kids." Her face turned red, and she stammered for a moment before she settled on defensive indignation. "I don't let her cry it out like you probably did with your kids. I actually validate her feelings and help her process them." I shook my head, trying to stay calm. There's a difference between validating feelings and enabling bad behavior. Letting her scream and disrupt everyone's meal while you bend over backward to soothe her every demand isn't teaching her emotional regulation, it's teaching her that a tantrum will get her whatever she wants. And honestly, it's exhausting for the rest of us to have to sit through this every time we have a family gathering. Her jaw clenched, and she scoffed. "So what? You're saying I'm a bad mother?" I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "I'm saying that you don't get to sit here and act like you're the expert on parenting when your own methods clearly aren't working. You came in here judging my kids, my son, who was literally just having a respectful conversation with an adult, and my daughter, who simply asked if she could set the table a certain way. Meanwhile, your daughter has spent the last 20 minutes screaming at the dinner table because she doesn't like the food you packed for her." The hypocrisy is astounding. The table had gone completely silent. My meal was pretending to focus on her plate. My husband looked uncomfortable, and a couple of relatives exchanged glances, clearly unsure whether to intervene or let us hash it out. My sister looked like she wanted to explode, but was struggling to find a response that wouldn't prove my point. Finally, she scoffed, grabbed her purse, and stood up. "You know what? I don't need to sit here and be attacked like this. If my parenting is such an issue for everyone, maybe we just won't come to these family gatherings anymore." With that, she picked up her still sniffling daughter and stormed out, leaving behind an awkward silence and a table full of people who didn't quite know how to react. My meal cleared her throat. "Well," she said after a long pause, "I think we can all agree that was ... eventful." I exhaled sharply and picked up my fork again, shaking my head. I don't know why she thinks she can dish it out but can't take it. If she wants to judge my parenting, she'd better be ready to take a long, hard look at her own. The conversation slowly resumed after that, though there was an unspoken tension lingering in the air. My husband squeezed my hand under the table, a silent show of support. Later that evening, after everyone had left, I sat on the couch, replaying the entire interaction in my head. A part of me wondered if I should have handled it differently, maybe pulled her aside instead of calling her out in front of everyone. But another part of me felt relieved, as if I had finally set a boundary I should have drawn a long time ago. The next day, I received a long, passive-aggressive text from my sister. She accused me of humiliating her in front of the family and claimed that I had always been jealous of her dedicated parenting. She went on about how I was dismissive of her struggles and that I had ganged up on her. I debated whether to respond. I could have pointed out all the times she had criticized my parenting without a second thought. I could have reminded her that I had bitten my tongue for years, trying to keep the peace. But in the end, I simply replied, "I'm sorry you feel that way. But I'm not going to apologize for standing up for myself and my kids." She left me on read. Days passed, and she didn't reach out. Family members started reaching out to me instead, some saying they understood my frustration, others saying I should have let it go for the sake of peace. But honestly, I didn't regret it. Maybe this would be the wake-up call she needed. Or maybe she just doubled down. Either way, I was done playing the role of the silent sister who took the criticism without ever pushing back. If standing up for myself and my kids makes me the bad guy, so be it. At least now, she knows I'm not going to sit there and take it anymore.